The success of Donald Trump and the success of Elon Musk to me is pure belief driven.
I think that's interesting because that is literally the law of accumulation.
You're the average of your friends. If you surround yourself with very, very successful friends, it'll probably lift your average.
Everyone has this predisposed greatness. You're not going to get there unless you put the work in.
When I hear about people's transformative experience with psychedelics, I must say it piques my curiosity for sure.
For some people, doing like Bufo or doing things like that is therapy.
Why do really wealthy people stay wealthy, rich, and privileged even if they didn't work for it? Today we're talking about manifestation, but in my mind, it's a bigger concept of how do people achieve goals?
Exactly.
Is that a fair one?
I think that's fair. I was talking to my boyfriend and he was actually saying how he does not like the term manifestation, but views it more as this law of accumulation.
Okay.
So you have these goals, you have these dreams, but achievable dreams, like not like I want to grow wings and fly.
Sure.
You know, I want to do this.
It's hard to manifest
with life.
that.
It is hard to manifest that. So instead of this idea of manifestation though, he's looking at it as a law of accumulation, baby steps, sort of. Let me reach this thing. Let me get this thing under my belt in order to achieve.
When did you first start hearing these terms?
Manifestation, I've been hearing for a while. I used to live in LA.
Okay, got it. So it's a very dream-oriented city.
Yes. So I think manifestation, I probably heard about it prior to moving to LA in 2020.
Okay.
Pre-COVID, I might add.
Sure.
Into COVID. But I really started hearing about it a lot in LA. It was everywhere.
Okay.
It wasn't really off the beaten path at that point.
Sure.
But it became really very much at the forefront of the
conversation. This is the time of Calm and Headspace and meditation apps.
And crystals, psychics.
So you felt like there was a wave there. But if you pull back, did you come across like the book, The Secret or The Law of Attraction when you were younger?
I don't know if I did.
Okay. I think I first came across The Law of Attraction.
Yeah.
And then this book, The Secret. And then there's some other books like The Alchemist and such that kind of talk about these life paths, these life journeys, visualization and realization. And overall belief is that we're all gods. And if you have enough belief and practice, you can kind of manifest your reality in whatever that form.
Yeah.
So I came across it earlier. It sounds like you hit it in the 2000s when like we kind of were lacking religion and there was this push into like, how do we connect to each other spiritually? And these services popped up and everyone's meditating.
That and it goes from this like taboo sort of thing into not at all taboo.
True.
Into totally fine if you carry a crystal around in your purse.
Right.
Whereas if you did that in, 2012, you would be seen as possibly a pariah, if not just super fucking weird.
Sure, super weird. And it's definitely much more accepted in LA.
It is, but also you could do it anywhere now, I think. Yeah. At least in the US.
For me, what I was always thinking through is when I looked at people that I admired, highly successful people, whether they accomplished something politically or financially or in business or personally or even socially or nonprofit, anyone that had accomplished great things, I always, as a kid, was trying to understand, like, how did they do this? Like, what got them to that point?
I think that's interesting because that is literally the law of accumulation.
Right. If we were breaking it down, at least the way I think about it is it's about small steps leading to big outcomes. Like the criticism of manifestation is like, oh, I don't have to do anything. I just believe. And then magically, like my life's going to transform versus saying, no. I have this thing I want to achieve. I have this point in the map I want to get to. And I'm like doing these little things every day to kind of build up to that point.
That's why my boyfriend said that he did not like the term manifestation because it seemed to, not like woody-doo, but it seemed to elicit this possible connotation of I don't actually have to do shit.
It's lazy success.
Exactly. As long as I'm thinking it, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's just not true.
That's not true. Yeah. And it's funny because I talk a lot about belief. The way I often think about it is you're building, like whether you practice something or you take steps to learn something or you visualize it, you're building this foundation of belief. And then if you start believing that you deserve this outcome, then basically the outcome, the universe kind of delivers that outcome to you. Right. And if you believe you're going to fail, then you're going to fail. And if you believe that you're going to succeed, you succeed. And I would argue that I always come back to this foundation of belief because it answers a few questions for me. So like, here's one question. Like, why do inherently negative people often get sick? I'd argue belief. Why do really wealthy, rich, privileged people typically stay wealthy, rich, and privileged, even if they didn't work for it? I'd argue because they believe they deserve it, right? Why do people that do bad things, but believe they deserve great things, get great things? I would argue because they fundamentally believe they deserve it. And then the way I think is like, how do you build that belief, whether it's through practice or surrounding yourself with success or different experiences, and you build this foundation of belief, and then you're in the position to kind of receive it.
What were your kind of starting beliefs in order to become very successful?
When I was a young child, I was like the entrepreneurial kid, right? So when they had the fundraiser at school and they're selling the books, you're selling the chocolate bars. I was always a kid doing that. I liked it way more than school. So in high school, I had this principal.
Bizarre principal.
Those what?
Bizarre principal?
He was a bizarre principal. I mean, he was like a unique entrepreneurial principal. He always had things kind of going on outside of school that
Wait, like what? That's actually really cool.
Well, like...
How big was your school too?
I mean, it was tiny. It was Lake Oswego High School. It's like maybe, 500 kids or something.
Okay. That's really neat.
It was nice. And he had like alternative things. So like when I went into the front office one day, he had these books that he's selling that were these Oregon photography books. And I'm like, what's this? And he's like, oh, I've got a warehouse full of these books. And I was like, hey, why don't I sell some of these books for you? And he's like, sounds great. Like, I can't even believe he let me do this. And I was a sophomore. So I found some junior that had a car. We drove to my principal's warehouse and we loaded up the trunk with boxes of these Oregon tourism books, basically these picture books. And then we drove through the town to all the bookshops and I'd come in with this like box of books and just convince them to buy them for me. And it was like, I don't know why or how I ended up in this situation, right? And I was paying this junior to drive me around. And then I was selling books to all the local bookshops and the bank tellers and the real estate offices. And I made a bunch of money. And I remember that being the first time where I was like, I can just like find something to do and I can just do it. And it's going to probably work out and I'm going to earn money.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you think about like the building blocks of confidence and the building blocks of belief. That was like a first block.
Yeah.
Of like, I tried something that was non-typical and suddenly it actually worked and I saw financial success from it. It built me confidence. It built my ability to sell. And suddenly I was like, oh, and from there, it was just like more events like those building up to bigger and bigger things that built up this like ladder of confidence. Right.
This idea of confidence is so incredibly important because if you don't have confidence, you're not going to believe.
Right.
You're not going to become whatever it is you believe you're going to become.
Right.
Because you just simply can't even get over the hump of the start.
That's true. And confidence also attracts people. So you can bring team members around you. It enables you to sell. I've definitely met people that worked hard and had positive and negative experiences. And in their negative experiences, they saw them as a growing experience. Mm-hmm. And that built up their blocks of confidence, right? Mm-hmm. I've also met incredibly arrogant people that grew up in very privileged households that were just confident from the moment they walked out of their parents' home.
Yeah.
And they didn't have those experiences, but they still found a lot of success because I would argue their confidence led them to believe they deserved it. And because they believed they deserved it, they broadcasted it. And then they kind of found their way to that. Mm-hmm. It's actually one of the hardest things to measure for me with entrepreneurs. And I maybe mentioned it before on our show is how you measure whether somebody fundamentally believes they can be successful or whether at the end of the day, they're like, well, a lot of entrepreneurs fail. I'll probably fail, but let me go ahead and try it.
It also ties into why you don't like people that have side hustles per se if they are really gung-ho on starting something big. If Snapchat, had been founded any other way, it probably wouldn't have become Snapchat if there were a bunch of side hustles.
Probably. I mean, there's definitely stories of early Zuckerberg's days where he had other things going on outside of Facebook. And at some point they're like, let's focus here and make this thing win. But it's always better to bet on somebody where, their vision is so aligned with an outcome that could be really big that they're completely committed to it.
Yeah. Have there been people you've backed or entrepreneurs you backed who you were iffy on because they did have a few other side hustles, but you believed in them so much and you saw their vision that you were like, fuck it, I am going to nix this rule that I normally have for myself and back them.
Yeah, I've lost on every one of those deals.
Really?
For sure. Whenever they had like, if this doesn't work out, I've always got this other thing. It's never worked out.
That's really interesting.
Right. It's like you think of that scene in like The Dark Knight where Christopher Bale has to like make this leap of faith to kind of escape this prison he's being held in. And at some point he has to like let go of the rope. He knows that like he's either making the jump or he's basically dying. And that's what empowers him to make the jump in that scene from the movie. I think it's a little bit like that, which is like, it's not to say, oh, great, you have a family and they can support you financially. I'm not saying you don't want that. Like it's great to have a network of people that can support you in case things go wrong. But if you're tied on 3 or 4 different things and you're like, I'm just going to focus on whatever works, but I'm going to raise money for this one and I'm going to hope these other 2 can kind of work out or not. I think at the end of the day, for it to really go, you have to like let go of the rope.
You're either like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, or maybe you're not that, but you're still teetering on this wire.
Yeah, exactly right. It's kind of like having a boyfriend and still trolling through people on online dating apps.
Yes.
It's like you still have the rope. This could work out, but just in case, I'm going to have a bunch of backups, which means that your visual outcome, your mental capacity is now split.
Yeah.
So it's like you kind of have to like drop the rope. Be like, I'm going all in on this concept. And the other thing that's important here is realizing that like, if that concept doesn't work, it's not a failure, it's a learning experience. And so you need to be able to drive confidence from those failures, being like, I just learned something important. I'm now smarter because of it. Technically it was a failure, but I'm a smarter person. And now I'm going to go into my next journey. So instead of thinking of it's like, oh, a failure drops you on your level of confidence, you have to realize those failures actually are building you up to the next moment of potential success.
Exactly. I fully believe in that. I think failing is very important.
For sure. Yeah. And trying stuff. That's kind of talks to you and I mentioned fear, right? It's like a lot of people have this fear of trying things because they have a fear of failure.
Yeah. Going back, just sidetrack for a second though. When we were at dinner the other day and my boyfriend or you, I guess maybe you guys had talked.
Okay.
Or something like that. And you were like, oh, but you deleted this dating app, didn't you?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah. I remember being like, what?
Yeah.
He did that for me?
Yeah, that's right. He let go of the rope.
He let go of the rope, but he didn't say anything. And then you were like, wait, you didn't tell her, dude?
Yeah. Well, it's like a milestone, right?
Yeah. And he was like, no, should I have?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you should have.
Yeah.
And so then I gave him the honor of deleting it off of my phone. But
nice. Yeah, but he let go of the rope, right? He's like, this is where I want to go. I'm going to tell the universe this is my committed path.
Yeah.
It may or may not work out.
I haven't really unpacked this now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
But he didn't tell me. I wasn't even going on the dating app at this point. Like, I wasn't even clicking it open, which I'm very proud of because, again, as we've talked about, dating apps, Facebook, Snapchat, all of them, I don't have them.
Yeah.
Or I hadn't.
Yeah.
Now I don't have any of them.
Right.
Because I would click them open and then immediately click out of them.
Right.
And I would just lose, a few seconds, a minute, whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't need that in my life. But I found it interesting that he didn't say anything and that he wouldn't have said anything. And I probably would have still had the app on my phone without ever using it.
Well, it's like if I was backing an entrepreneur or working with them, even if I hadn't invested in them and they said, oh, I'm doing 2 or 3 things. And then at some point they just stopped doing those things. I would like to know that, right? Because for me, it's a really good, indicator or signal that they really want to focus on one thing and be successful with one thing.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Another question you had earlier, which makes sense to me, is this concept of time spent, right? So when you're saying like, I'm really distracted on the social apps, one thing that's been true for me is if you want to accomplish really great things, I still believe in this kind of 100,000 hour principle of like, look, if you're going to be great at anything, you've got to log a lot of time against that thing. And there's only so much time you have. And so you have to cut out a lot of things. And so for me, on early days, it was like, family, work. It was really just 2 things. In fact, one of the criticisms that people would have of me is that I don't develop friendships very effectively because in many cases, I don't spend a lot of time outside of family work because there was no rope, right? It's like, look, family's going to work out. Work's going to work out. I don't need a backup, which later in life has proven bad, actually. Like I should have developed that. But, at a point where I'm like, I only have so many hours in the day. I can only split it between family and work. This is where I'm going to focus. It's also why things for me is like, okay, I'm not going to drink alcohol. I'm going to choose not to engage into drugs because it all just sounds like time. And I just don't want to lose time. I'd much rather invest time into like whatever visions or pursuits I have. I'd rather invest time in my core relationships. So I made a lot of those sacrifices, but I think it's really hard. I've met a few entrepreneurs that can definitely do everything. But in most cases, I think that if you have all these things fighting for your time, it's really hard to log those 100,000 hours. It just takes a long time. I
think it's interesting why you don't drink alcohol or do drugs though. Can you talk about that? I think it's maybe one of the most unique things about you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. At a very early age, I think the concept of sacrifice always made sense to me. Maybe because again, I believe in time and I believe in the scarce resource of time. And so there was a point at which I was probably like 14, maybe 13. I was young and all my friends were starting to experiment with stuff. I kind of thought to myself, like, look, if I want to have this exceptional life, I want this beautiful family. I want this beautiful love story. I want this incredible career. I want a lot of financial success. I have to give up something for that. Like there's something I have to give up. And so I kind of said like, I'll just give up ever using alcohol or drugs. And that'll just streamline me. That'll be my sacrifice. I will sacrifice that and I will look for reward. One thing that probably is true is that built belief for me because then I suddenly believed I deserved those things because I made that sacrifice. Now, with that said, there are people way more successful than me that do a ton of drugs and drink a ton of alcohol. So certainly my path is pretty bespoke to me and certainly not indicative of some standard recipe. But I think on the early days for me, making that trade with God or the universe, that sacrifice did build up something for me in belief, enabled me to be very focused on what I wanted to do.
It is a recipe. You not doing drugs or alcohol is just X in the equation.
Right.
It's whatever that sacrifice is, whatever fuels the belief.
Yeah, that's right. For someone else, maybe they're 14, 15, 16, and they have an experience of somebody who's drunk all the time, highly successful and super social. And maybe their connection is, oh, I need to be like a great social party animal in order to become financially successful. And maybe their ex is that outcome too, right? Yeah. But to your point, for me, it was a variable that created like a foundation of belief and focus for me. I think there's also other tangential things that are really beneficial for me because I did decide not to do that. I also think there's components of experiences I missed out on. I was in a very heavy party fraternity, which was super fun. I was the sober one all the time. I'd meet with friends that are like super into wine or super into psychedelics and stuff, and they have these incredible experiences. And I recognize I've chosen to skip out on those. And at some point in my life, maybe I'll choose to explore those. But initially, I made that sacrifice.
I like what you just said because it goes into this idea of, for some people, doing like Bufo or doing things like that.
Yeah.
is therapy. That is their therapy.
Yeah.
They are resetting or they are exploring past trauma.
That's right.
Other people, it's going on a 10-mile run.
Sure.
Skiing alone, whatnot. For me, one of my biggest ones is reading. I love to read.
Yeah.
Especially just a fiction book. I, used to be historical fiction. Sarah J. Maas ruined my life because I've read every single one of her books now. And I like fantasy because I can get lost in it, but it's a form of meditation to get lost in a book for me. That is kind of a reset for me.
Yep.
So if I'm having a bad day or a great day, doesn't really matter. If I'm sad, if I'm stressed, if I just read a chapter of something, for whatever reason, it helps me reset. It helps me get out of my own head.
Yeah.
And come away almost as if I've just taken a bunch of deep breaths.
Yeah.
So what are your spiritual things or meditation?
And there's definitely times snowboarding where I find like a nice solo meditative state that like gives me moments of clarity. I do a lot of cycling and mountain biking, like being outdoors definitely finds those moments for me, which is like pretty transcendent. There's moments with people that I find are very clarifying, where it's like you can kind of slow down time and like kind of be in the moment really effectively. I've not developed a strong meditative practice.
Oh, no, I can't. I don't meditate.
Yeah. But I probably should. We probably should.
We probably should.
Yeah. That's been harder to find. I think also living in LA for so long, I didn't find these moments. Moving to Aspen, I find these moments a lot more because you're not in traffic and you're not with all the stresses of the city. And suddenly you can find these kind of calming, meditative moments. I think just like many people, like I'm still seeking how to keep that practice and find that time. I understand that I've given up sacrifices and stuff, but I mean, there's definitely moments when I can't find clarity. And certainly I talk to people that are like, oh my gosh, you have this conflict you're dealing with, or you have these choices. You need to go do psychedelics. It's going to answer the questions for you. And certainly I like the idea that like a 20-minute Bufo experience suddenly is whatever, 2 years of therapeutic, talking, and suddenly I have clarity on things, but I'm not personally there yet. I'm kind of like, no, I think I want to work through it myself, like without the assistance of these things. Similar to the way I think about drugs and alcohol. It's like, I want to be in a social situation and have a great time without needing to be drunk. Like I want to be able to like have a complicated scenario personally and find my way through it without having to use a third party agent to basically move me there. With that said, there's a lot of value to these experiences for people. And when people talk to me about them, I've never felt like the need to get into weed. I've never felt like the temptation for like cocaine or something. But when I hear about people's transformative experiences with psychedelics, I must say it piques my curiosity for sure. But I'm definitely not there yet.
Yeah. I do really like the idea of doing a guided experience.
Yeah.
I personally have not done one, but I can tell you right now that I will eventually do one.
Yeah.
And when we have my boyfriend on, he can definitely explain this better. But looking at the way that psychedelics are able to actually literally change neural pathways.
Incredible.
Is so fucking cool.
I agree. And if you're at a point where like you're trying to find that structure of belief, maybe that can help, right? Because actually maybe it can show you a vision of the future that you actually believe is going to happen. And maybe that helps you manifest it or start law of accumulating it.
Yeah. Of all of the founders that either you work with, you admire, you know very well personally, talk about like 3 or 1 who you really admire their belief system. Like you admire kind of how they go about life and the world and why.
Well, I'll break it into a few buckets. One thing that surprised me is the success of Donald Trump and the success of Elon Musk to me is pure belief driven. Elon at this point, I think fundamentally believes he can create any company he wants and it can become $1 trillion company. And he just believes it so wholeheartedly. And he has a community of belief around him. Thousands to tens of thousands to 100,000s of investors and fans and followers. So it's not only his belief, but his community and support around him believing him kind of puts him in a position to he can kind of do anything, which is pretty unbelievable. And Donald Trump's kind of the same way, right? You have somebody that like in many ways failed numerous times in business, decides he's going to run presidency, but he always fundamentally believes he's the best.
I'm very highly educated. I know words. I have the best words.
He seems to broadcast, whether he believes internally is a question, but like he broadcasts a level of belief in himself that's like unparalleled. Then he built a community of people, of believers around him. And then suddenly he's winning his second election. I mean, kind of incredible, right? If you think about the building blocks, it's not like he worked his way up in politics to believe that he could be president, right? He came out of absolutely nowhere, but just believed he was the best, in the world.
He worked his way up in life. And got to that point where he didn't need to climb another ladder. He could just jump from one ladder to another.
It's the same as Elon. Elon didn't have a background in space. He didn't have a background in automotive, right? But he believed he had the ability to do it. At one point, I spent time with Mark Cuban. We were just having an off-the-cuff, casual conversation. And I said something like, how did all this go? Like broadcast.com and all the success. And he told me, he said one day he woke up and he realized there was going to be somebody on the planet that was the luckiest person alive. And he just decided that day it was going to be him.
That's fucking awesome.
And he just believed it. The second bucket I'd say is like when Mike Dubin from Dollar Shave Club found his win and sold his company, people would come up to me and be like, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Love him. Like, oh, he's the greatest. Like, so glad he found all the success. With both all these examples, I kind of see two things, right? You have somebody that fundamentally believes they're going after a mission and they're going to make the world better because of this mission. And they're also what I like, kind enough to create a supporting group that when they become successful, everyone's like, couldn't have happened to a nicer person. I really like that combination because there's certainly people that believe they're successful that have a lot of haters, right? That really people don't want them to be successful. I think it's a lot easier if you believe you're successful and people love you and they also want to see you find that success. I also think it's why like when things like Facebook and large companies go public and they have millions of individual shareholders, suddenly you even find more success because there's this kind of collected consciousness of people that want to see you become successful. We saw it happen in crypto, right? It's like as more people bought into crypto with their money and their belief system, then suddenly crypto finds this like kind of wave, right? And so when I think about the people I've come across, yes, it's people that have really strong fundamental beliefs, but I love it when they also are paired with like giant fan bases that are kind of pushing their agenda.
Like the kind of person that knows everyone's name, that is just kind.
Right? Because when you see somebody succeed and they succeed, like I looked at a bunch of business that were around like patent trolls, right? People that buy patents and sit on them and they just sue people into submission. It's like, I don't want to be part of those businesses because it's like there's not a community of people supporting them, right? At the end of the day, they're out there for themselves and they're typically earning money through pretty negative experiences, even though they're right. And people aren't like, oh, thank God that guy that bought that patent so many years ago finally got paid on it, right? Like it's completely, it's super disconnected. So I like experiences where it's like, yeah, if there's millions of fans of Liquid Death and they all love the brand and they love the founder and they all believe it's going to be a big, big thing, which so far it looks like it is. And let's assume that that finds its way into some great outcome, public market or otherwise. You want a world where everyone's like, oh my God, couldn't happen to a nicer team, couldn't happen to a better company. I love being part of this journey. I'm part of this journey as well. I think that's a good win. Like to me, those are the wins that feel really meaningful.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking the other day and it's why you don't invest in a tobacco company or something like that because it doesn't really align with your own personal beliefs.
Right.
You know, if you did do that, it might make you feel a little scummy.
Right. Yeah. We looked at all the vape investments early days. We passed on all of them. You certainly like nicotine's finding its way back in the public and I'm super nervous about getting involved in it. I never touched adult content. It was just like sectors where I'm like, I just don't want to be in this like moral gray sector. I want to be involved with CEOs that have big beliefs, big visions, and millions of people that love what they do and they can find their way to like that success. There's a lot of other ways to make money, but for me, that's a more meaningful way.
Yeah.
But if you bring this down to like people individually, what it means, I think it starts with small visions leading to big visions. That's kind of the law of accumulation thesis, which I really like. At one point, I was spending time with a coach that was coaching this major team. I was asking them like, how do you take somebody that doesn't believe they deserve to win and they become a winner? And their statement was you have to surround them with other winners. And the moment they're surrounded with their team members that have won and they see that we all put our pants on same time every day and we all eat the same breakfast and stuff. And like when you're surrounded by people that are extremely successful, but also very much like you, it builds your belief system that you can also become that successful. It's kind of like you're the average of your friends. If you surround yourself with very, very successful friends, it'll probably lift your average. If you surround yourself with a bunch of delinquents that aren't becoming super successful, it'll probably lower your average. And so when you surround yourself with community members that are really successful, then it builds that belief for you. And then you can start small successes and gain to bigger successes.
Well, and it also goes back to, I know you've talked about this before at that lunch with my boyfriend. He actually mentioned the same thing, which was not only surrounding yourself with winners, but also going through the day and marking things such as making your bed a win.
The little wins.
I've actually started to crowdsource this question.
Okay.
We're still in a few episodes, we'll circle back and I'll give you the results.
Yeah.
But routine.
Yeah.
I personally don't necessarily have a routine, like a static routine.
Yeah.
But I do things that are routine in the way that they make me feel put together.
Right.
Such as I make my bed.
Yeah.
Because if I see a messy bed, I feel messy.
Yeah.
Like I literally feel discombobulated.
Agreed.
I have to have my nails done.
Sure.
I always do the same color because I don't want to think about it.
Yeah.
But if my nails are not done, I again feel like my head is going to explode for some reason.
Yep.
Those are my two like routine-esque sort of things.
Yeah, they calm you. Those are your practices.
And like, a clean room, but clean. Yeah, those are my practices. Do you have a routine? Or if not, like what are your practices?
I do have a set schedule. I like it when my days are pretty structured, so I know what I'm thinking about and what I'm doing. Certainly people have criticized being like, does that really allow moments of inspiration or serendipity?
I think it does.
Sometimes I can definitely be overscheduled.
Yeah, but it allows you, by having the schedule already like preset,
and
you can look at it in the morning and be like, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It allows you to go through the day, and when you aren't scheduled, to live in the moment, I think.
Yeah.
Because you know that you're not missing anything.
Right. I've done everything I need to do.
You've done everything you need to do. And now you can be present.
Yeah.
And live your life without having to think about whatever's next.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, if I need to get it done, I make sure to put time. And to your second point, I understand the clean bed concept. For me, like, a clean, organized house puts me at peace. Yeah. So that way my brain can be chaotic, but my environment doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think the third piece is often like removing decisions, right? Like at this point, I think we all generally believe that we all have a limited amount of strong decision-making kind of fluid a day. And if you drain that fluid off of meaningless decisions, oh my God, like what's my outfit going to be? Or like this, you know, what am I having for breakfast? If you start draining like strong fluid off of these kind of non-impactful decisions, then arguably you're spending currency in the wrong place. So I do like the thesis of decision currency of like, okay, how can I get rid of the basic stuff that isn't going to impact me and just outsource that? Which means for me, I often eat the same foods most days. Like I kind of like have this similar routine every day. I kind of wear a lot of the same clothes. I own multiple of the same clothes, so I don't have to make a decision. If I made a decision that this shirt's great, I'll just buy 2 or 3 so that I don't have to really worry about it, which I'm sure for the people around me is less thrilling. Just removing decision currency.
I do that. I wear a variation of the same thing every single day.
Yeah. Like, I see your jacket.
Yeah, exactly. I fully wear a variation of the same thing every day. It was interesting though. So I was asking the boyfriend about this. Yeah. I assumed he would be somebody who did have a routine. Yeah. Because I think we have very nicely fallen into the opposites attract category. Turns out he does not have a routine. So I asked him this question. Yeah. And some of his practices are, he loves the color black. Most of his clothes are black. Yeah. But he also buys things based on the idea of, okay, this shirt will go with these pants. Like, he can literally go in blindfolded to his closet, feel that there are some pants, feel a shirt, and know for a fact that if he puts it on, takes the blindfold off, it will work. Yeah. And that's how he buys clothes. Yeah, I get that. Because he doesn't want to have to necessarily think about it, but he loves fashion. Yeah. That may not be part of a routine, but he's definitely taking away variables. Exactly. It's something that gives him peace, knowing that he doesn't necessarily have to think about it, but he has options. Yeah. I certainly love that practice. Yeah. And I think it's just freeing up your mind to spend time on what really is important to you. The other thing I think that's important is, and this is hard, is like, as much as we're all manifestation and law of accumulation, law of attraction, all these things, it is really important to like be able to articulate what you want. And a lot of people can't. And there's definitely times in my life where I can't really articulate what I want. And then I definitely shouldn't be surprised if I don't get it. Because like, if I can't tell you exactly what I want, then how is the world going to work on my behalf to get me to that point? Right. So a lot of times I'm like, look, we have to pick a point on the map. It can be the wrong point, but we got to pick something, right? And we have to work and really focus on getting to that point. And when you wake up every day, you got to think about that point in the map where you want to get to. You got to visualize it, and then you got to believe you deserve it. Then you got to believe it's coming to you. It's on your timeline. Just working through time to get to that point in the map. You're going to get there no matter what. But sometimes it's really hard to pick the point. Also, I think not being able to communicate, keeping something bottled up inside works the same way as not having a made bed. I agree. Not having my nails done. Yeah. Like, it takes up space in your mind and it makes you disorganized. I agree. Because it doesn't allow you to have the freedom to be in your chaos. Yeah. The way I think about it is, if you have a pie chart that represents your cognitive time, like your time through the day, and you're breaking it up, and some big portion of it is based on indecision. What do I want? Where do I want to go? What about this? What about this? I feel chaotic. Suddenly it's like you're not logging your 100,000 hours towards whatever you wanted to get to. You're just taking up time with indecision, which is why in many cases making a decision is better than no decision. Just commit to it so you can stop thinking about it, right? And to your point, like, there's little creature comforts of our daily lives that make us feel good. There's the routine and the sanctity of coffee and your nails and the way we dress and these kind of like practices. And a lot of that is just getting you into like a calm state. I'm like, okay, I feel good. If this is what makes me feel organized. Like, I love showers. I take a shower every single morning. Like, it's part of my ritual. You know, maybe it's why I lost my hair. Who the heck knows? You know what I mean? Like, but like at the end of the day, it's a really important ritual for me to like start my day. I feel clean. I feel fresh. I'm ready to go. Right. If you take that out, I'm a little discombobulated. Right. I'm a little bit disheveled. Like, I'm not quite there. Right. So I think there's those practices that get you set up. And then there's how you invest your time. Right. And then invest your time is saying, where do I want to be? Am I starting to build a belief system to get there? And then you might have to adjust. Right. Maybe you're halfway there and you're like, I changed my mind. But
changing minds is important to note. So there's a startup we recently worked with, and they changed their strategy 3 times over 10 years. What they found is over 10 years, it was very demoralizing to the team because you're 3 years, 4 years into a strategy. Typically strategies take 7 to 10 years to become successful, right? And then you pivot to a new strategy. Well, what ends up happening is the staff thinks we've been here for 4 years on a 7 to 10 year journey. The way I see it is, no, you just changed strategies. You're now at year 0. We're starting the clock over again. This is why pivots are so hard, is because it's not that you can't pivot to another point of success, but you may be resetting your clock. And if you reset your clock, that means that all the team members are going to start feeling really fatigued, because if they're 10 years in, but it's only 3 years on the most recent strategy, they got another like 7 years before they're going to probably find really big success, maybe 4. But there's time. One thing I think through is on that 100,000 hour thing, if you have a point on the map where you want to go to, if you do keep changing that point, you are potentially resetting components of time. So you have to make sure you have some level of commitment to those journeys. Otherwise, it might take a long time to get there.
Was that startup successful?
I mean, their most recent pivot looks like it could be successful, but I would argue the team is so tired because they're 10 years deep. They have another 5 years in front of them or 4 years in front of them. We'll see if they make it. But for many people, they'll tap out, because those are just long journeys. And big dreams sometimes take long times. Like there's no overnight successes, right? Like the fastest we've ever had a company go from 0 to exit was 4 years since we invested. But before that, the founder probably spent over 2 years thinking and, planning the business. It's like even your overnight 4-year success was probably more like 6. And a lot of our companies take 10. You want these big outcomes. It takes real time to get there. There's certainly people that get maybe lucky, or maybe they have a belief system that accelerates it. And certainly we love fast success. It's true. But in most cases, these are long journeys. My overall advice is to do things every day that build your belief structure. Mm-hmm. And on top of that belief structure, then you can reach for really large goals. Yeah. Right? But you've got to basically build that belief every day. And if you're spending a lot of time on things that are monotonous or they're not helping you build the belief,
cut them out.
You probably should cut them out, because they're probably not serving you and getting you where you want to go.
Yeah. And just believe in yourself.
Yeah. You got to get to that. A lot of people don't. Mm-hmm. Like they might broadcast they do, but internally, I'm not sure they do.
Well, it's like the idea of Maktoub from The Alchemist,
right?
Which is basically like fate boiled down.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that everyone has this, predisposed greatness. Mm-hmm. It's just if you're not going to get there unless you put the work in. So you won't ever maybe achieve this greatness that you are fated for.
Right.
Unless you take the steps to get there.
That's right. Maktoub.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Good episode.
Cheers.
Cheers.